So I was thinking this week about the whole concept of being modern disciples, and I was chatting with Courtney, so I gave her my sermon title and everything, and I was walking down the hallway to the office, and I could hear Courtney laughing. I'm like, what's so funny? So she showed me this thing. She put modern disciples in the computer, and this is what comes up. And so this is apparently Jesus and the disciples having their Last Supper at McDonald's. It wasn't kind of what I had in mind, really, in terms of the modern disciple thing. But there is a kind of a truth in it, though, really, right? I mean, it could be their last meal. It's McDonald's, right? You never know what the repercussions of eating at McDonald's might be. But I also think there's an interesting thought about the idea, if we have the right perception of Jesus always being where people were, then most likely Jesus would have eaten at McDonald's, or at least would have wandered by. And in Canada, of course, it would have been Tim Hortons, right? I mean, that just if we look at the Gospels in that sort of real light, it would have been where people were and where regular people were. So, aside from being funny, I think it's kind of accurate. So the whole idea of discipleship, I think, again, in the church, over the years, we've kind of gotten confused about it, I guess is the best word. So when we think of discipleship, we think of this, right? If I say to you, I say the word disciples, don't you go to that. Jesus with a gang of men hanging around him, right? And if I said to you, if you were to be a disciple, how would you be? I think your first impression would be, well, I would be hanging around with Jesus. Right? We'd be going to weddings and turning water into wine. Right? We'd be sort of at the edge of the village, and Jesus would be up at the front, and we'd be going, yes, he's right, that's true. You know, you'd be kind of like a true disciple, following him around and agreeing with what he said, and then sitting up late at night and having theological discussions. Right? Like you're back in university. Really, right? So really doing nothing important in the sake of the world, right? And I think that's where we've gotten confused. I think it's where I got confused over the years about what it is to be a disciple. Because the reality of it is we're taught the disciples were not perfect, but they were next in line. And we could never be like them, right? Because there's Jesus, there's God, and then below Jesus is the disciples, and then there's the masses, us, the unwashed, right? And even the church called us for centuries the mass, right? We were the ones that needed to be corrected. So I think we've kind of gotten stuck there. So one of the things that I think is the defining moment for Christians is we forget in the practice of our Christianity that our Christianity should be post-resurrection and not pre-resurrection. And we often get stuck in the idea, like for instance, you don't even know all the disciples, do you? I don't even know them. I have to go back and read them over again. I know the basic four main ones, but I have to go back and read them over again, even to remember who they're, because to me they're not that important. Because their lives don't mean anything to me. Because I get stuck in the pre-resurrection story, the idea of Jesus and the disciples wandering around. And yet as Christians, we're supposed to focus on the post-story. What happened after Jesus died? What did the disciples do? Where did they go? What impact did they have in the world, right? And so we have a look at that. People have speculated on that. So, go ahead, Alice. So this is from Matthew, right? Here's what Jesus says. Go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things I have commanded to you, and lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. Amen. Now, what has been the result of that directive? War, right? When the Spanish conquistadors come into South America, They pulled up in their ships, the ramp came down, and a big guy in a gold suit got off with a big cross, and they literally took over 12 million people within a year and a half. Now, most of that was through the gift of infectious diseases from Europe, but nevertheless, it was in the name of the cross. And the same happened in North America, right? The idea was you go and make disciples, which somebody got confused with take disciples or force disciples, right? So it got lost. But what's interesting is, this is just one speculation. All the colors on that, on the left-hand side, and I'm not going to read them off for you, are the names of disciples, right? So Andrew at the top, and then Philip and Bartholomew and Matthew and Thomas and James and Simon, Thaddeus, another one you wouldn't remember, right? John, Peter. And then on the map itself are the places that they were supposed to have gone after Jesus died. Because they took seriously, where shall I go and what shall I do as a disciple? So off they went. And there are still icons and churches and places in all those spots that are dedicated to those disciples. A couple of thousand years later, they went and made a mark on those places. So they took seriously after the death of Jesus, go into the world and make disciples. But they didn't do it by force. None of those had a conquering force behind them. They went in ones and twos and lived with the people in those towns and villages that they came across. So what does it mean for us to be a disciple in the modern age? If you take your faith seriously and you want to be a disciple and you feel that's your calling. So this is one of the questions that I thought, can you be a believer and not a disciple? So, can you be a person of faith and yet not tell anybody? So I used to have this discussion all the time with people, and I've told you this before, typically at parties at about midnight, right? Where people will come up to me after they've had enough liquid courage and then tell me that they're just as good a Christian as I am, even though they don't go to church, and they haven't actually read the Bible, and they don't really believe in Jesus, but that's not the point. And I always say to them, I'm sure you're a better person than I am, but you're not a Christian. Because Christians go to church. Christians read the Bible. Christians have a belief system. Being a Christian doesn't make you a better person. It just makes you a disciple. It makes you a person who believes in something, certain things. But in our culture, going to church or being a Christian has been synonymous with thinking you're a better person. And yet we know that's not true. So can you be a believer and not a disciple? Does there have to be a connection with being a person of faith and something external with that? Some way of telling the world, I believe. And I'm not telling you there is or there isn't. I'm just asking you, is there? So I was thinking, instead of running around with Jesus in a gang and going to McDonald's and having late-night theological discussions about saving the world, maybe there are simple ways that we can be disciples that we haven't really thought about as being parts of our faith. One of them I always think about is this whole idea of paying it forward. I mean, it's become a very contemporary thing in the modern world. Movies have been made about it, and it's become a campaign. But I would like to think that that started early on in Christianity with the idea of doing things for other people that you don't tell anybody. There's a couple of places in the gospel where Jesus talks about doing things for other people, but doing them in secret. That you don't get rewarded when you tell you've done something good. That the best things you do for other people are the ones nobody knows that you've done them. And to me, that's always sort of the same theory as the pay it forward. I do something for someone else because someone has done something good for me. My first experience with this was when I was in university and I got stuck between places to live. And I had to ask a stranger if I could stay with them for a while. And I knew them just through somebody else. I did not know these people. And they let me stay for a while until I got myself sorted out. And then I asked them, how can I ever repay you? And they said, well, you don't have to repay us. You just have to do this for somebody else at some point. And I said, well, how will you know? And they said, we won't. But we just trust that you will do that. And that was in the early 70s. I'd never heard of this before. And they were a practicing Roman Catholic family with 3 small children. And I was some strange Protestant kid. Right? So, I mean, you know they were doing it out of the goodness of their heart. But that was the first time I'd ever heard anybody tell me, I don't want anything but this one thing. I want you to do this. It stuck with me for the rest of my life. So one thing of being a disciple is, how do you show other people your faith by action? We talked about this around Christmas, the idea of showing kindness. How do you show kindness in your life to people you don't know? I know all of you who go to big cities and walk by someone like this, you have 2 reactions. One is you put your head down and walk as fast as you can and feel really guilty, right? And the other is you stop and fish in your pocket for change and feel confused because you think, oh, I'm going to give them money and then they're going to do something bad with it because you make a moral judgment, right? There's no clear way to deal with that. The only clear way to deal with it is to be kind, is to not judge, is to not predetermine who that person is and why they're there and how they got there. And I think, again, that's the part of Jesus' message, is this non-judgmental aspect. You do not know that person. You don't know how they got there any more than the person who's passing by in the nice Porsche got their Porsche. You do not know any more about one than you know about the other. And so they should both get the same amount of kindness. And I think it's, again, a part of our discipleship and how we react to the world as we enter it. Forgiveness. We talk about forgiveness. Doug led us through a whole service there a little while ago, and again, I'm always reinforced with this idea that how many of us struggle with the idea of forgiveness in our lives, both being forgiven and forgiving. And I thought this was good again. Forgiveness does not change the past, but it enlarges the future. And again, I think it's one of those things why it was so prominent in the Gospels, and it's so prominent in the Old Testament, because it is one of the basic elements of human existence. Can we forgive? Can we be forgiven? Or are we stuck in time? Because we are stuck by those moments in which we cannot forgive and in which we can't be forgiven. And I think it's something we always need to work on as people of faith. I just love this. This holding the door thing has become ridiculous. I went on, because I hold the door for people. I always have. I hold them for men. I hold it for women. I hold it for kids. I hold it for dogs and cats. I don't care. I just think it's worth holding the door for people. Holding the door is a symbol of civility. Right? It's not a gender thing. It's you today are more important than me. May I help you enter this place? May I help you leave this place? That's all it is. And I was looking at this, and there was a bunch of ones about, I hate when men hold the door open for me, from women. And then there was one I was going to put on here. It said, if you have to question my motivation for holding the door open for you, you're an idiot. I'm not even going to put that up there, but I'll probably use it. I mean, what better thing can you teach your children in the simplest of ways than the gift to a stranger of just giving them access? Right? I mean, what's one of the most common phrases we use about advancements in our lives? Somebody opened the door for me. right into a profession or a job, right? Like it's the simplest of human endeavors. They just open the door. I think it's still a good thing, but hey, I'm from Nova Scotia. What do I know? I love this. If you have the power to make someone happy, do it. The world needs more of that. I just love that little face with the eyes painted on the arm there. I mean, that would make me happy every day. I may start doing that. I'm not so sure yet, but yeah, world peace. I know. It's amazing. There's just a whole bundle of stuff there that's good, right? This one I always love. I smile at strangers. And I've told you the story before, and I won't give you the long version of it, but me standing at a checkout counter in a store one night in the evening and looking out into the parking lot and seeing this face in the glass of this really grouchy-looking old man, and then realizing it was my reflection. And then thinking, do I really look like that? I'm just buying, like, I don't know, hamburgers or something. Am I that stressed and angry looking? I got to get over that. And it was really a shock for me that I would be perceived by strangers as that old guy who's grouchy. I didn't feel grouchy, but I really looked grouchy. I even scared myself. I was walking with my with my brother in New York City years ago, and we're walking somewhere downtown. He's taking me out for lunch at some fancy restaurant. And we're walking down, I can't remember, it was 52nd Street or somewhere. People are out, it's a nice day in the summer. People are walking by in their expensive suits and clothing and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, hey, how you doing? Hi, morning, hi. Kevin's like, would you stop that? And I'm like, what? He says, you're scaring people. He says, nobody says that here. Nobody says hi. If you don't know people, you don't talk to them. I'm like, sorry about that. I'm just saying hi. Can you go back one just for that for a second? Dream big, talk big, and turn your faith loose. Now, for a lot of us, that's a difficult thing to do, right? Because there's a high expectation that we'll do something magnanimous. I think just the things we've just talked about are things that turn our faith loose. Just the small, little, tiny, daily things. Turning your faith loose. Yeah, sure, go ahead. So I always like this. I've talked about this all my life in various ways. I've found different phases and phrases. Church is what happens when we get out of the seats and into the streets. I always thought that was a great way of looking at it. The idea that this is just where we get our gas. Right? This is what this is. Some people say this is where we get our batteries charged. This is where we get reminded. This is not the end of our faith. This is just the resting stop. Colleen was telling me a story this week. I hadn't even told her what I was preaching about, and she had gone to a funeral of one of her colleagues who died of cancer at 43. And she had come back from the funeral, was in a police car with one of her colleagues, and he was a younger gentleman. And of course, the funeral had been about faith and this woman's faith and the way she lived her life and how that interacted with her police work. And the guy turned to Colleen and he said, "Are you religious?" Because he knew she was married to a minister, right? But as I've said, she's got a bit of a potty mouth, so sometimes it's hard to tell. And we're running, aren't we? Okay. I hope she's not watching this morning. and Colleen said, "Yes, I am." And then he proceeded to ask her why and what it meant to her. And she talked about what her faith meant to her in that ride. And she talked very simply about that was a daily thing and that her faith interacted with her work and how she treated people and how she felt about being treated with people and how she tried to be better when she made mistakes. That was all because of her faith. And what was interesting, she said, was not that I talked like that, she said, because I've talked like that before, but she said it was the first time I felt comfortable talking about that. She said, I won't tell you how old she is because then I will get in trouble. But she said, it's interesting, I'm at this place in my life, and now for the first time, I'm finally comfortable talking about my faith. You see, so it's not just being a disciple. Are you comfortable and secure enough about what you believe that you're no longer defensive, right? And that's the difference. You don't have to tell anybody else what they believe anymore because you're not defensive about what you believe anymore. And I've said this in church ever since I've been here. Do you know what you believe? Are you comfortable with what you believe? Do you understand what you believe? If you've got those bases covered, you can talk to anybody about your belief because you're no longer defensive. You don't have to prove anything anymore. And of course, this has always been my mantra. I've felt this in one way or another since I was a child. Regardless of where we are, what we are, how we feel, how we struggle, at the end of the day, no matter how many mistakes we make, God is always with us. And even when we make mistakes and we're not quite sure, God helps steer us through that if we ask for it. And I really believe that's the part of the disciples. They understood from Jesus. I think that's the part John Lennon didn't get. It's that they understood that by the end. They could be thick, and they could be ordinary, and they could make mistakes. But God was always present, and that made the difference. Thank you.